I love her so much. She had a beautiful smile. She had a pretty, beautiful personality. She loved to sing and dance. Her favorite thing was Barbies. She loved playing with Barbies. She has like 40 Barbies in her room. And she was very sociable. All the kids at school liked her.
Sometimes when I would drop her off to school in the mornings and I'd have my radio on louder than she wanted it to be. And we'd pull up and say, "Are you going to turn that down?" Because, kids, you don't want her, she doesn't want her classmates and anybody to hear it. I thought it was funny.
She was really good at sports. She was good at basketball and she was good at soccer and baseball. She was the type of person who she wanted to, when she played a sport, like when she was playing baseball, she wanted to hit a home run on the first try. She didn't want to, and she would get a little bit frustrated sometimes when she couldn't hit the home run. I'm like, practice, practice, practice. You have to practice. And so I noticed sometimes when she was doing her schoolwork, she would say, practice, 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 practice.
She was, very strong-willed. I got to say probably she had the strongest will I think I've known of anybody, adult, kid, anyone. It's real strong will. Often when I would, tutor her in math, for example, we'd have long discussions about who knows what. Oh man, that would be pretty funny.
Ever since she was a baby, people would come up to her and want to kiss her and want to hold her and say how pretty she was. She was a beautiful little girl. She was beautiful inside and out. And she just had this warmth about her that people just gravitated to her. Her teachers, they liked her. Students liked her. People, strangers liked her. So she was just a really nice, warm. She was my heart. She was my heart. From the time she was born, from the time she was growing inside of me, she was my heart. I knew she was going to be feisty because even when I was pregnant with her, she would just, the way she would kick. She's like, let me out, let me out. I'm ready for the world.
Scene 2, take 1, marker, soft sticks.
Canvas that. So let's start. Tell me what happened.
What happened? I guess it was a slow process. I think it started 2009. She was getting sick throughout that year. Then I had recently just started a new job. And I remember commenting to some of the guys that she seemed sickly, more than normal. And I know earlier in that year she'd gotten sick a few times where it would seem like it seemed like a flu or something. She'd be sick for a couple of days and then she'd be okay.
She started getting really skinny. She stopped eating. She was vomiting. And her stomach started swelling up. She looked like she was about 5 months pregnant. And we took her to the pediatrician, and they said she was constipated. And I kept telling her, no, something's wrong with my child. Something's more wrong with her. She's not constipated. Something's wrong because she looked really malnutrition, and I knew something was wrong with her. But the pediatrician kept saying that she's growing, and she's constipated. Give her some laxative, and that's it.
She was really struggling. We'd see her at school, and she's barely moving. By then, her stomach was, protruding quite a bit, actually. And we were thinking, okay, if she's constipated, we need to figure this out. We need to find out what's going on. One particular day, I'm looking at her and she shows me this little bulge in her stomach. And she makes a joke to me. She says, well, that's like poo-poo in my stomach. It's like, well, if that is, we need to get that out.
I called the pediatrician's office, said, we're bringing her in. We're going to bring her in or we're going to emergency.
Her physicians were resisting us bringing her in because they were convinced, that she was constipated.
So we brought her in and she was sick. She started throwing up. And then they took some tests and they found out, they didn't know what was wrong, but they knew that her blood count, her red blood cells were extremely low. They were negative, and her white blood counts were off the charts. So we knew it was trying to fight off something.
And I think as time went on, they realized it was beyond that after a few tests, and very nervous about what it could be. I think they were trying to avoid telling us that it might be, cancerous, but that's what they were starting to believe based on certain markers and things they were seeing.
They found a big tumor in her stomach, in her abdomen area, and they figured they knew it was cancer.
I think it took a little while before we found out. They figured it was lymphoma, but they wasn't sure which one, and eventually concluded that it was, I guess through trial and error, I think they concluded that it was non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. I was never all that confident that was like the exact diagnosis. I think they sort of settled on it. Like, well, it's not this, it's got to be that through process of elimination.
And then they were going to start treating her with chemo. And then, and we were and so they thought that, and it was in the third stage at this time. Based
on where she was in the process, we were hearing numbers like she has probably about an 85% chance. Now, take those odds. 85% sound pretty good.
Their evaluation was once they give her chemo, and this was beginning of April, May, they probably give her like 3 rounds of chemo, and probably by October she should be okay.
By this point in time, our lives are in chaos because everything's changing. She's sick. We have to constantly go back and forth to the hospital. So now we're in the war.
My husband and I met each other in high school here locally, and I kind of helped him go through med school, and we just kept having boy after boy kept coming. So we had 5 boys, and it's just wonderful having a basketball team. They're great. It was always a spectacle when they were younger and we were out and about. My husband had cancer twice through our med school journey and whatnot, which was a big event. I was afraid to have Riley when I got pregnant with him. I told my mom, there's no way I can have 5 kids. Riley was a really good boy when he was young, very compliant and always happy. And I worked at the boys' school a lot, and Riley was kind of like the school mascot. He was with me in the stroller doing everything I did, and I always had to drag him along to my singing rehearsals. I started in the singing group when he was 1. So he's very musical and very opinionated about songs he liked or didn't like, and very vocal and smart, really smart and intelligent, and beautiful boy.
He obviously had the benefit of having 4 older brothers, so he was very compensated in dealing with lots of things. His brothers would play with him and teach him a lot of things. He had a really sweet spirit about him, but he was very aggressive, very confident in himself. He would be the one who, if the brothers had a party with their friends over, he would definitely become the center of attention. He would love to act, to play. He was able to play the piano.
Our relationship growing up together as a family, we were all, very active. We all played outside, played with the neighborhood kids, kind of a typical American family in that aspect.
I had went to Nashville for about a week just to visit. I took 2 of the boys, and Riley called me on the phone. I think he was 6 years old, and he left a really odd message. He said, in fact, I saved it for 4 years until I accidentally erased it, but he was like, Mom, I love you, I love you, I love you so much. Okay, I hope you're having a good time, bye. And I told my sister-in-law, something's wrong with him. He doesn't sound right. He's sick or homesick. I said, I don't know what's going on with him.
Staycation here, and the day before we heard the news, we were at the water park, a local water park here, and Riley just wasn't acting normal to us. I mean, he wasn't. We were trying to get him to come with us on the rides and so forth, and he was just kind of cold and felt sick. And we were like, "Well, what's going on? Was he, has the flu or does he have a cold or whatever?" So we were just kind of brushed it off. But then I just remember very distinctly he was kind of wrapped up in a towel, kind of just shivering, and Mom was holding him, and just he didn't feel so good. And
We'll stay in San Diego. We won't go to Kings Canyon. I'm like, okay, good. And then I got home. We were in church, and Riley was laying on my lap, which he often did, and I was rubbing behind his ear, and I felt this bump. And my husband, being a physician, I said, what's this bump? It felt like about the size of a dime. And he said, oh, maybe it's a cyst or something. We'll take care of it.
I noticed that he did have a lump behind his ear, and as a physician, I kind of blew it off. I don't treat my own children. But I thought maybe it's a cyst or a small lymph node. That night, my wife and her female intuition said, you know what, we really need to get this checked out. So we took him to the doctor that evening.
And went right to the pediatrician. And he examined him, and while I was sitting there, the word cancer crossed through my brain, and I'm like, no way, what, don't even think about that. I was worried because my husband had lymphoma, and I'm like, that's ridiculous. But it did, like a ticker tape, cancer.
That same day, later during the day, we got a phone call. We were actually planning to go to the beach that day. And my wife initially took the phone call, and she said, Robin, come talk to the doctor. The doctor's on the phone. So I came to the phone, and I picked it up, and we found out that his white count was extremely high.
Because they were just fighting. So I ran back in, and Robin hung up, and he pulled me into the van after that and said, Riley has leukemia. And I ignorantly said, what's that? I didn't even know what it was. And he said, cancer.
We all kind of knew something was up because of the way our parents had left the house with Riley in such a rush and in such an emotional state. So we were all upset, kind of crying in our own little corners of the house.
Think what ran through your mind?
When I first heard the diagnosis of Riley having leukemia, it was really different for me. I feel as if I'm a pretty logical thinker, but my brain just went to mush. It went in circles, and I didn't know where I was. I was in a brain fog because I couldn't really accept what I was hearing on the phone. And as I was trying to reel in the import of this phone conversation, then I started going back to, okay, think, Robin, what do we need to do? Okay, what's the next step?
What went through my mind when we found out he first had leukemia, when Robin first told me, was all the flashbacks of Robin, chemo and dumping throw-up buckets, and I'm like, there's no way my 6-year-old is gonna do what my husband did twice.
Our grandparents came over and told us after our parents had left, take him to the hospital. We just, I don't know, it was just, they took us in the living room and sat us down and just prayed with us. And we were just crying and praying with them, and they were just letting us know what happened. We were all just shocked and confused, not sure what exactly was happening. But
the kind of leukemia Riley had was acute myeloid leukemia, and there's two kinds of leukemia. There's acute lymphocytic, I believe I said that right, ALL, lymphocytic leukemia, which involves the lymph system, and that's what children commonly get. It's rare for a child to get AML, which is acute myeloid leukemia. Usually when an adult gets it, it's pretty much not as hard as pancreatic cancer to fight, but pretty much there's not going to last. And when a kid gets it, they gave him a 50% chance right away, right when we went to the ICU.
Well, with Justin, he, at age 5, I was on a jet ski, water ski trip with my cross-country team. It was during the summer, and he had been pale lately. And it was August, so it was kind of strange for him to be pale. But it was a few days before his 5-year-old checkup to get ready for kindergarten. So we thought, well, we'll just, he's maybe a little anemic, and we'll, talk to the doctor. And so I went on the trip with the team, which he normally would go on, but because he had this doctor's appointment, he couldn't go. and neither could Lisa, which she normally would go. And towards the end of the trip, the lake patrol pulled up next to the jet ski that I was on and said, "Are you Dave DeLong?" And I said, "Yes, I am." And he says, "Well, there's an emergency at home and you need to call your wife." Well, this was before cell phones, so I went into shore and they let me use their phone, and I contacted my brother-in-law, who then told me that the doctor thought that Justin had leukemia. So immediately I thought that was a death sentence, because I didn't know much about leukemia, but the word itself was very scary to me. I think I didn't handle it real well. I was kind of naive and was more scared of the whole situation. My wife was a nurse, so I kind of buried myself in work, and she kind of dealt with the clinic and the cancer itself and taking care of Justin. His treatment that he went through for the leukemia lasted for about 3.5 years total. And the first year was kind of tough. He had to go to the clinic almost every day, and that was difficult. But he seemed to handle the whole thing real well. They told us that we would be in the hospital for multiple stays, and that never happened. He never seemed to get a cold, even though he had no immune system. He kind of sailed through the chemo, and he went into remission fairly quickly. So it seemed like it wasn't as bad as we thought it would be. Our life went back to normal, and it didn't seem that bad. In fact, my wife and I had conversations that if he survived, then this might have been something that pulled our family closer together, and it made us appreciate our kids more than we maybe would have, because we tend to take our kids for granted in the fact that they'll outlive us and live a full life.
Justin and I were sitting in the exam room, and the doctor walked in, and he took one look at Justin, and he turned to me and he said, "You nurses, you know how to take care of everyone but your own kids." And he was a doctor that I worked with at the hospital, because I'm a nurse, and I was just floored that he said that to me. And I immediately started crying, because whatever he saw, I did not see. And he ordered blood work to be drawn. The next day we had his blood drawn, and waited by the phone, and he was playing a little game called Mario Brothers. You know Mario Brothers. And he was trying to trap this little turtle at the base of the stairs to get more lives so he could extend play. He's 5 years old. It was this brand new discovery for him. And the phone rang, and it was the same pediatrician who told me that Justin had leukemia. And I hung up the phone, and I looked at Justin, who was just mesmerized by this game, his big brown eyes. And I just stared at him for a while, like, what, I still can't see it. I can't see this illness. And all of a sudden he jumped up, and he was all excited because he trapped the little turtle, and he jumps up and he says, Mommy, now I have 100 lives. The next day we ended up at Children's Hospital Los Angeles and began treatments. I heard over and over again while we were there in those first days that Justin had the good cancer. It was acute lymphoblastic leukemia, which is the most common kind of childhood cancer. And while that bolstered me a bit, and to think, oh good, it's the good one, I still had obvious fears about what was ahead, the kind of treatments. The chemotherapy became the classic kid in that period of time, in the year that followed of hard treatment, where he was bald and frail and pale, and he had no immune system. We had to keep him isolated at home, and it was a long year, but he handled it really well. He was a very, very compliant little boy. Justin did pretty well, did very well that first year. Actually, he was only hospitalized initially for the first 2 weeks at diagnosis, and then everything was done outpatient. In those years, he went back to school. He started kindergarten, and he thrived. Our family grew. We had another at that time when Justin was diagnosed, we already had our one daughter. So Jessica was 18 months old when leukemia entered our world. And then we had Joelle, and they were all into running and cross country and track, and Justin did a lot of, like, he mountain biked and he golfed with my husband, and the family grew.
We were in the hospital for the month of April. We went home in May, probably right after Mother's Day. We went home. She was home for like a couple of days. She got sick again, and we had to rush her to emergency hospital. Every month she was in surgery. Every month she was going to surgery, getting shots in her back, having PICC lines in her chest, doing the chemo, vomiting, and to watch her, some days she'll have good days, most days were bad. Taylor said, every time I go back to the hospital, I get bad news. And then like in August, and she was back in the hospital in August, and that's when she told me she didn't want to, she knew she couldn't fight anymore. She says, I can't fight anymore. I want to see the light. She goes, this is too much. Dr. Samaroni called me in the office to let me know that the cancer came back and that she wasn't going to make it. They didn't know how long she had, but they knew that she wasn't going to make it. So they needed to give her a quality of life. And this was February 11th, right? January 12th was Taylor's birthday. And on February 11th, that's when they told us that my daughter was going to die. And they didn't know how long, but they knew it wasn't going to be 6 months or a year. It's probably in weeks. Because the doctor and I both sat in a room and we talked about it. We're like, we both decided, should we go in, should we tell her? And I've said, yeah, she's big enough, and she's capable of knowing that what's going on. So with the worries and fears, because I knew my daughter, I just knew her so well, and I knew she would be okay, because the fact that back in August when she told me she just couldn't fight anymore, and she did a long battle, a long fight. So when the doctor told her that her cancer came back, and I looked at her face, she didn't seem worried. She didn't seem afraid. She's just like, okay. And seeing her relax, seeing her relax, and seeing her being such a big girl and being so strong at 10 years old, that someone's telling you that you're going to die, and kids are amazing, that she's just like, okay. Jason's views were a little bit different than mine, and I was in the room alone. Jason wasn't there when the doctor told me that she was going to die. And so Jason didn't have that opportunity to be there because his views would have been different. It affected our marriage a lot. It was really, it affected our marriage. It affected our marriage a lot. And I was taking it as my daughter. Like, I took the possessive role, that it was my daughter. I make all the decisions with my daughter because I had her, and I'm just gonna do what's right for her. And sometimes wanted to leave him leave him out of being part of a parenting. And I just basically took, like, Taylor and I would sit here, we would not include him, and I isolated him, and that was my part, my doing. My views, I believe that is good to share it with them, just to it's it's their body, it's their life. They need to know what's going on with it. He never, all the way to the end, Jason was still fighting all the way to the end. He even had a conference with her doctors, the social workers, with the nurses on staff, that he conducted a a meeting with the doctors, and he wanted to run other tests, and he wanted to, to do other things with her to make sure she was going to be okay. Jason wasn't accepting the fact that she was dying. Sometimes us as parents, we don't want to face the fact that your child is dying. We want to stick pins and needles in our children. We want to do the extra x-rays. We want to do the extra ultrasounds. We want to do the extra chemo for our own reasons to keep our child alive. And sometimes we forget that we're hurting the child was the one who's doing all this suffering.